Hello, this is Keith George, and this is our Module 2 introduction. So let's take a look at what we're going to be working on in this module. We are talking this time about project-based learning and in particular the curriculum framing questions. So we'll be working through our Intel lessons during this unit. So the first thing to talk about are the ideas that will be covered in the Planning My Unit section. And the first thing to talk about is the topics: curriculum framing questions and ongoing student-centered assessment. Our key activities: we're going to look at our portfolio components. We're going to create voice thread discussion. You're going to create a publication on projects, identify 21st century skills for your unit, get your unit plan idea, and reflect on your learning on your blog. Our essential question for this is: how can technology be used most effectively to support and assess student learning? And in this particular module, we're going to look at CFQs and how they can support student learning and how you can plan ongoing student-centered assessment. Where we're heading in Module 3, we're going to start to connect all of these pieces together to help to utilize the internet to support teaching and learning. Module 4, we'll create some samples, student project outcomes, some things like that. Module 5, we're going to start assessing those student projects. Module 6, we're going to plan for success with support and self-direction. Module 7 is the teacher as facilitator. And finally, in Module 8, we will showcase the units that you create. So let's talk about curriculum framing questions, what they are and how do they help. And this is some material from the Intel Education project. So I'm going to utilize that so that it coincides with what you're seeing in your Intel reader. The first question is always, why do we use curriculum framing questions? And there's a lot of reasons for this. The first one is that it really helps to address those higher order thinking skills. It requires students to compare and synthesize, interpretate, and evaluate the content. It really addresses those higher levels of Bloom's and those higher order thinking skills. Student projects that are compelling and engaging, and they require more than just a simple restatement of facts. That's really helping us to move past Webb's DOK, depth of knowledge, those low levels. We want to move up on that as well. And to focus on important topics, to connect learning to other disciplines, to ask questions that have been asked throughout history, and to address compelling questions that our students might ask. So curriculum framing questions are designed to try to help in each of these areas. And it's important to remember that they must be well thought out and well constructed in order to be effective. So that's why we're spending some time on it in this module. So one of the things that we talked about that CFQs do is they guide a unit of study, and they include both, or not both, all three: essential, unit, and content questions. So let's look at those three types. Essential questions are the broad and open-ended questions. These are kind of the big ideas, the big concepts, and they often cross disciplines and help students relate subjects together. So, for instance, essential questions are those bigger ideas like, why is there war? Things like that. They're very hard to answer, or if not impossible to answer, with a quick little statement. They usually take a great deal of thought and work to answer effectively. Now, unit questions, again, are open-ended, but they tie directly to a project or a unit. So, keeping with our little social studies theme of war, open-ended questions for a particular unit might be, how could the outcome of World War II differed without the use of the atomic bomb? So things like that. They help students demonstrate the scope of their understanding of a subject. Again, it's not factual responses. It's open-ended and takes some time to answer effectively. Now, the third type are content questions. These are more fact-based, concrete answers. They have a distinct and narrow set of correct answers, and these include definitions, identifications, general recall, and to some extent, these are the questions commonly found on a test. Now, that's a little bit misleading because you can have unit questions that are open-ended that are found on a test, uh, but they again are open-ended, so they will be more essay type questions or related to particular projects. So those are the three types of curriculum framing questions. And this is how they kind of fit together. Your essential question is kind of at the top of the hierarchy. And then you have one or more unit questions. And just because the chart here shows 2 unit questions, please don't think that that's a limit or even a requirement. You might have a unit that only has 1 unit question, but you might have a unit that has 3 or 4 as well. And then inside each of those unit questions, you're obviously also going to have content questions. And again, for the purposes of illustration, there are only 2 content questions, but you certainly are going to have more than 2 content questions for a unit. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. But this is how the question types fit together. Now, how do these help teachers? It really helps teachers focus the different important topics across the whole year or the whole semester and bring meaning across those subject areas. These essential questions raise important issues. They are almost always or can almost always be cross-curricular, and they usually center around major problems, issues, concerns, themes, things like that, that also occur in other units. So again, these are the really big picture questions. They can help engage students by bringing meaning to the study of the events and topics that sometimes might seem unrelated. But with a well-constructed essential question, it's easy for students to see how these things fit together. It will help students utilize their imagination and connect with the subject and connect that with their own experience and ideas. Thinking back to our "Why is there war?" question, and then leading up into a unit about World War II. However, we have in our lifetimes and in our students' lifetimes been engaged in war, and there are wars going on somewhere in the world almost all the time. So this is easy to relate to what they have experienced as far as we're still trying to answer why is there war. Essential questions rarely have one obvious right answer, and so this challenges students to explore the many different possibilities. This is a great way to have students debate or disagree respectfully, but disagree about different ideas. And it takes a lot of knowledge to be able to have those debates and discussions effectively. And that's something that encourages in-depth discussion and research, and that lets you set the stage for further questioning. Essential questions can help students compare and contrast and make analogies. These questions are relevant, hopefully are interesting, but are written in age-appropriate, student-level language. So that's important to remember when you think through your essential questions. The essential questions that we have in our college courses would not be appropriate for your third grade classroom, and vice versa. You're going to make it age appropriate. So how do essential questions differ from unit questions? Unit questions are tied to a specific topic, where essential questions are very broad. Essential questions bridge between disciplines and other units. For example, how does conflict produce change? Where unit questions support and continue the study of an essential question by looking at a bit smaller areas. So here are some examples: stress on the environment impact evolution, changes in how are changes in economics a factor of war, and in Charlotte's Web, how do the animals' different abilities help Wilbur survive and succeed? So again, unit questions are a little bit more specific. They are tied to the topic or unit, whereas essential questions are very, very broad and usually cover at least the entire semester, if not the entire year. It is important to make the relationship between these two types of questions, though. An essential question that is well written can be supported by well written unit questions. So here are some examples. I'm not going to try to read each of these to you, but when you're talking about math, helping to understand the world around me, that unit question of what are fractals good for could be replaced with any number of unit topics. What are fractions good for? What are formulas good for? If you skip down to how does art reflect change, how does art reflect or change society, you can look at Impressionist art of the late 1800s and how does your own art reflect your life and culture now. So again, unit questions serve a supporting role to essential questions. Now we're into the third type. Content questions differ from both unit and essential questions in a couple of ways. Content questions deal mostly with facts rather than the interpretation of the facts, and they usually have clear-cut, right-wrong answers. How are volcanoes made? What is photosynthesis? What is a fable? Notice that these could be longer answered questions, but they are right and wrong. So a content question doesn't have to be a multiple choice A, B, or C. It doesn't have to be a yes, no. It doesn't have to be true, false. It can be a little bit more in depth, like how do you find the values of unknowns in equations? That's going to take a little bit to answer, but there is a right answer to it, a clearly correct answer. So that's one of the traits of a content question. There is a correct answer to it. The difference between essential questions and a content question. Essential questions, again, are big. How does art reflect culture or change it? And one answer content questions: what is Renaissance art? How does conflict produce change? What is the conflict in this story? Why do laws change versus how are laws made? So you can see the comparison between these two types of questions here. So for your unit, as you work through after reading the resources in the Intel Reader and the other resources in this module, you are going to work to create the content framing questions for your unit. You will do an essential question. You will actually share that the idea for your essential question in your VoiceThread comment, and you will go ahead and move from there to your unit questions and your content questions. So if you have any questions, don't forget to add those to the discussion board or send an email. And good luck on Module 2.